Welcome to the Babylonian Podcast. I am Michael Light, your host. And in this season of the Babylonian, we are going through the New Testament Apocrypha. And we invite you to join us too by either following along with the notes in the show notes below or by going to our website, thebabylonian.com. Either way, we're going to jump right into the New Testament Apocrypha, going with scholars, sages, and the scriptures, and Bibling on. Peter, how's it going?
Hey, good afternoon. Or
Good afternoon.
say for the listeners, good morning or good night or good noon.
Yeah, or good middle of the shift while you're listening to this as a nighttime stalker. Good twilight.
Good lunch break.
Yeah, good time. Yeah, it's good. Good to see you. Good to be back in the land of Babylonia to talk about some extra biblical texts, some New Testament Apocrypha.
Let's check these books out from the local Babylonian library.
Yeah, today the manuscript we're checking out from the Babylonian library will be from a new section. We're actually entering into a new section of the bookshelf of the New Testament Apocrypha bookshelf in the Babylonian library, or subsection rather. So we've been talking about apocryphal gospels. So far, they've all been infancy gospels, but today we are going to be looking at our first non-infancy apocryphal gospel. And this is actually a unique apocryphal gospel because it's all sayings. There's not really stories. It's just a list of sayings. And you might actually know this apocryphal gospel. In fact, I'd be surprised if even the listeners hadn't at least heard of this gospel. This is by far the most popular. Well, maybe the infancy gospel of Thomas is close, but the gospel of Thomas is what we're talking today. Not to be confused with the infancy gospel of Thomas, which is an infancy gospel and is a story. It's interesting. That was the third episode of this season. But today we're talking about the gospel of Thomas. What do you know about the gospel of Thomas? I'm assuming you've heard of it before.
Oh, yes, I've heard about the Gospel of Thomas. I've heard that at the end it has a somewhat sexist scene in it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing I know. Is I know that there's the notorious sexist scene at the end where Jesus tells Mary or some other lady, I can't remember who. I don't think it's Mary, the mother of Jesus. I think it's Mary, like maybe Mary Magdalene. She'll need to. Well, he doesn't say that she'll become a man, but that. But someone else asks if she should become a man, and then Jesus says, "Yeah, well, all people who are going to be saved become men," or something like that. So I'm probably, this is what I've heard, and you know how, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we will be talking about that one. Up until now, we, for the most part, I've been kind of giving summaries of the different apocryphal texts and explaining it piece by piece. But this one, since it's a list of sayings and they're all disconnected, we're actually just going to go by it saying by saying. And or not all of them. I think there's, if I remember correctly, there are 117 different sayings. They're all verses. So 117 verses, and we're just going to look at the ones that are original and interesting. A lot of these are at least very similar, if not exactly the same as little sections from the Synoptic Gospels, or sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes the Gospel of John. And I think there are some, there's one from 1 Corinthians, and which is one verse from that, which is, I'm guessing, saying attributed to Jesus there. But yeah, we're going to be actually reading these.
Cautious. I wonder if by reading primarily the ones that are spicy, I know that's the direction we're going to go, but maybe it'd be wise to just briefly mention that if we're picking the ones that are the most interesting, then excluding the ones that the listener might be more familiar with, that it might perhaps give us a view of the Gospel of Thomas that's maybe more negative than is necessary. You know what I mean? Like I imagine,
yes,
and I imagine like if we read the parts that like are the best, like most solid hot takes, not hot takes, the most solid takes.
Yeah.
They're not going to be as hot. They're not going to be as spicy, but we're going to focus on the part that's not as good. So it'll be more interesting. That doesn't mean everything in the Gospel of Thomas would be bad if we just take these parts that are spicy. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, this is only representative of what is unique and what this author has attributed to Jesus, whether they got it from another source or they themselves invented it. Either way, that's a good note. So if you're listening, and actually, that's a good note because I meant to say this. You can, as we say at the beginning of the video, you can find all these notes on my website in the link to wherever you're listening to this. And if you go to the section Works and Writings, you hit the Christian and extra biblical content and go to the New Testament Apocrypha, the Apocryphal Gospels, you can go to the section on the Gospel of Thomas. And I actually recreated one of the charts that's in the New Testament Apocrypha edition that we're reading that shows the source of each and every single saying, whether it's from a synoptic or from John or other, which is only 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. And then I also show which ones are original. So let me actually just count real quick, just to give an idea of how much is original. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, 42 unique sayings attributed, 42 unique sections that have been added to the Gospel of Thomas. So that is a good thing to point out, that there is a lot that is being reproduced from the synoptics and other gospels, but we do also, that is between a third and a half, I think, of the apocryphal gospel that is original. So, and you can see all that in the notes. You can follow along and see all that. I reproduced that chart, and in my opinion, I made it better because I also showed, if I remember correctly, the chart in here only shows what's copied from other New Testament texts, and then I show what's original as well. So yeah, with that being said, we're going to dive into the Apocryphal Gospel of Thomas, and we're going to look at what's new, what's novel, what this author has added. So as I said before, this is one of the most popular and perhaps the most well-known New Testament Apocrypha today. Scholars believe that this apocryphal gospel might have original sayings of Jesus that aren't found elsewhere. However, there are definitely parts where this author has put their own agenda into Jesus's mouth. So some scholars believe that some of these sayings might be authentic, but there are parts where these sayings just don't at all align with the Gospels or who Jesus is. They align with Gnostic, particularly Gnostic. They just sound like propaganda in the mouth of Jesus. So another interesting thing about this apocryphal gospel is that if you follow critical scholarship on the New Testament, a lot of scholars will believe that there is a Q source that underlines Mark that just has a bunch of sayings attributed to Jesus, and that the Gospel of Mark used this Q source that underlies it. Now, we don't have this Q source. It stands for Quell, which in German means, I'm trying to remember what it means. I don't know if you know, but
I don't know German.
either way, I think it's hypothetical, but either way, this is a hypothetical source that critical scholars of the New Testament, so non-Christian, non-confessing scholars, would say that Mark relied on this, and they didn't have any evidence. This is the only evidence that they have that such a source might exist. It couldn't be this source, obviously, because it's relying on all the other sources as well, all the other synoptic gospels, which were written later, and John, which was obviously written later. So anyways, this provides an example for them to think that perhaps if there was there could be another text early like this that had all the sayings of Jesus written down, and that's just sayings, no narrative, that Mark could have used. So that's something else that's interesting. If you don't know about that, you might be interested to look into the synoptic problem. We're not going to be talking about that on the Babylonian, at least not anytime soon. But yeah, anyways, so the Gospel of Thomas itself does date early. So it dates to about the mid 2nd century. So we're talking about 150 AD. The author claims to be Thomas Didymus. And you're going to want to remember in one of our episodes, and I'm starting to, I forget which one, but in one of our episodes, oh yes, it's the Pseudo Gospel of Matthew. We talked about why Thomas, a lot of this apocryphal material is attributed to Thomas. So go listen to that to get caught up on that. The sects, this could be Gnostic or Encretite, and we'll get to a lot of Encretites whenever we go over the apocryphal Acts. But pretty much these Encretites are a dualistic sect that promoted virginity. They did not believe in even sleeping with whoever you're married to. They didn't even believe in that. So It has some Gnostic and Enkratite influences, possibly Enkratite. It was probably written in Edessa. It's found among the Nag Hammadi codices, if you know about that. It was written in Greek originally. And of course, it's been popular for a long time among some groups, or at least well known. So we know Origen, Cyril of Alexandria, the Galatian Decree, the Stichometry of Nicephorus, and Hippolytus have all talked about it. And some suggest that it might be linked to some Syriac Acts of Thomas. So, with that being said, we're going to dive in and look at the sayings. We're going to read them one by one. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Peter, of course. Yeah, so let's look at these. So, the first saying, this is the first verse. Well, it opens up, it says, "These are the hidden sayings that the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus, Judas Thomas, wrote them down." Saying number one, and he said, this is Jesus, of course, "Whoever discovers the meaning of these sayings won't taste death." So this is, so remember that gnosis is the Greek word meaning knowledge. So one thing that the Gnostics would emphasize is salvation through knowledge. You had to have this special esoteric knowledge that only they had. So from the get-go, you can see this very obvious Gnostic propaganda. Whoever discovers the meanings of these sayings won't taste death. You want salvation, you want life. It's all about coming to an understanding of these sayings.
Can you explain what esoteric means?
Yes, esoteric is like a hidden spiritual meaning. So especially people who gave allegorical readings, although this isn't always connected to allegorical readings of scripture or things, but yeah, it's talking about, oh, there's this hidden spiritual meaning, and usually the people who are sharing this meaning, they're going to claim that they're the only like you have to get that meaning from them. You have to learn it from them. Yeah, so that's the opening statement, and you can see from the get-go that it's a Gnostic text. These sayings are for them propagating their teaching, whether there is some biblical basis as they take from the synoptics, or them creating their own things. Fourth saying, remember, we're talking about the more spicy sayings. The fourth saying, Jesus said, "The older person won't hesitate to ask a little 7-day-old child about the place of life, and they'll live, because many who are first will be last, and they'll become one."
Oh, the people will become one. Do you think that's what he's trying to get at?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
That's very, I mean, in religious context, when you use the word egalitarian, typically we're thinking about gender, but egalitarian, I think in general, just kind of puts people on equal levels. And that sounds pretty egalitarian, you know?
Yeah.
Because we're all going to become one. And the older person, you know, there's an assumption the older person's going to know more. And yet they'd be open to asking the younger person who's like 7 days old. I'm not going to say the only problem. One problem I find with that, though, is typically people who are 7 days old, if we ignore the infancy gospels, typically don't speak. You know, the infancy gospels, go back a few episodes and babies speak, but like.
Yeah, right. Good point. Well, I guess only Jesus even then. So.
Yeah.
I will say in this instance, though, it says that the older person won't hesitate to ask the little one. So it could be that they have equal understanding, but if the older person is asking the younger one, it seems that they don't know. So it's almost like, and maybe I'm connecting this too much to esoteric knowledge, but it's not necessarily about experience, but you have to get this knowledge from somewhere. And there's like a flipping things on their head, a reversal even, maybe even not necessarily egalitarian, but a reversal. And then of course, this is interpreting where Jesus does say, "Many who are first will be last." This interprets it as, well, it's about talking about knowledge here, about knowledge of the place of life, understanding life. So, yeah.
Or it's trying to explore one dimension of the first is last and the last will be first kind of thing. But so it's not saying that's all it is, but it's one dimension of it.
Yeah, that's fair.
What's the next one?
Saying number 7. Yeah, saying number 7. Jesus said, "Blessed is the lion that's eaten by a human and then becomes human. But how awful for the human who's eaten by a lion and the lion becomes human." Sounds like they took "you are what you eat" a little bit too seriously.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if the lion eats a human and becomes a human, I really have a hard time making sense of that. So if I eat pizza, am I going to become pizza? Oh yeah, I need to stop joking. Yeah, I don't know. That one's really hard to wrap my head around.
It's truly esoteric. I don't know what. Yeah, I can't say that I understand that. I don't know what I can't say that I've had too many interactions with lions. I've seen a couple lying down at a zoo. I imagine the ancient people would know a little bit more about lions, but these people might have spent a little bit too much time alone. I don't know. It's interesting. Anyways, that being said, and I don't necessarily know the meaning of all of these sayings that we're exploring, but either way, the next saying, saying number 8, Jesus says, the human being is like a wise fisher who cast a net into the sea and drew it up from the sea full of little fish. Among them, the wise fisher found a fine large fish and cast all the little fish back into the sea, easily choosing the large fish. Anyone who has ears to hear should hear.
This sounds very different from something Jesus says in the book of Matthew. I think because
What's
in the
that?
book of Matthew, he says that like the kingdom of heaven is like someone who goes ahead and fisherman who throws in his net and catches fish of different kinds.
Mm,
But, perhaps that's specifically talking about the diverse dimension of the kingdom of God, or diverse dimension of like the inhabitants of the kingdom of God. Whereas this one is specifically talking about a wise person being able to choose what's good and get rid of everything that's bad, eat the fish, spit out the bones, something like that. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. They can also easily choose that large. That's good. I didn't remember that parable. I guess it's a smaller, like lesser known parable. I trust you for sure. But that is interesting that maybe this is a reworking of that, or it might just be new. But yeah, that's interesting. My tendency would be to read this as talking about salvation. God is like, I don't know, casting out, sending the messages going out to many people, and the unimportant in whatever light, whether it's in sense of not knowing, are tossed out into damnation. And then it says one large fish. So I don't know if that, I guess some of their stuff has to talk about like unifying and becoming one. So maybe they see themselves as becoming one after death. And so in that sense, it represents their community. But yeah, I don't know if you have an alternate understanding of this parable.
The unifying sounds very Christian.
Yeah, I think I've liked there's a really good Bible Project podcast series called The Family of God, where it talks about how one of the differences between Christianity is how there's unity in diversity. I'm not sure, from my take of the Gospel of Thomas, it seems like there's not as much allowance for diversity. And I don't want to just make this individualism, but being yourself and being different in whatever culture or upbringing, but just becoming one, like you talked about, and we're going to see men becoming, or all women becoming men, and I don't know, yeah, the different peoples becoming
Lions and
one.
lions and
So
humans becoming humans.
yeah, or there, one was cursed and one was blessed. So I guess that
Yeah.
there's a certain way in which you need to become one. So I'm not sure that this is, I guess, a more totalitarian edition of unification. So next, saying 13, and this one is a little bit more like a conversation. Jesus said to his disciples, if you were to compare me to someone, who would you say I'm like? Simon Peter said to him, you're a just angel, which is not Matthew 16:18, where he says, you are the Christ, Son of the living God. Matthew said to him, you're like a wise philosopher. Thomas said to him, teacher, I'm completely unable to say whom you're like. Jesus said, I'm not your teacher. Because you've drunk, you've become intoxicated by the bubbling spring I've measured out. He took him aside and told him 3 things. When Thomas returned to his companions, they asked, what did Jesus say to you? Thomas said to them, if I tell you one of the things he said to me, you'll pick up stones and cast them at me, and fire will come out of the stones and burn you up.
That is esoteric knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's kind of like, I've got this knowledge.
Precisely.
And we're not going to say it. It's like when an author is like writing a book and they're like, oh, there was a monster so horrific. If I were to describe it to you, you'd have nightmares tonight. So I just won't describe it. And you're like, oh, and theoretically you're terrified, but actually pragmatically, you're not pragmatically, but like, physiologically, you're a little bit less terrified.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. This is also a pretty good apologetic for why Thomas's writings wouldn't have been written down anywhere else. because only Thomas learned them. Jesus took him aside and told it to him. And if he had told people, then definitely they would have stoned him to death, especially, Christians, people who are following this infamous rabbi who's about to be crucified around. So
you had to save it up and then share it later.
yeah, write it down. Can't tell it to anybody for sure.
He
Can't
probably
pass
told
that on. You got to write it down.
it to one person in isolation, and then that one person like kept it secret and told it to another person in isolation, didn't share it with anyone, and then said it. But the
Gnostics.
contents of what actually was said, it doesn't. We definitely can't write that down. That can't go to everyone. Just to a few people.
Yeah, this is like a esoteric apostolic succession here of like us Gnostics. Jesus gave this special knowledge to Thomas, and you have to be following. Thomas has kind of made this like chief apostle. Jesus tells him, "I'm not your teacher," and then he takes him aside and gives him this like extra special teaching. So yeah, there you go. All right, saying 22. Jesus saw some little children nursing. He said to his disciples, "These nursing children can be compared to those who enter the kingdom." They said to him, "Then we'll enter the kingdom as little children?" Jesus said to them, "When you make the two into one and make the inner like the outer and the outer like the inner and the upper like the lower, and so make the male and the female a single one so that the male won't be male nor the female female. When you make eyes in the place of an eye, a hand in the place of a hand, a foot in the place of a foot, and an image in the place of an image, then you'll enter the kingdom." You got that?
Can you repeat it one more time?
When you make the two into one and make the inner like the outer and the outer like the inner and the upper like the lower and the male, and so make the male and the female a single one so that the male won't be male nor the female female. When you make eyes in the place of an eye, a hand in the place of a hand, a foot in the place of a foot, and an image in the place of an image, then you'll enter the kingdom.
Wow. I actually, that makes a whole lot of sense. Don't ask me to explain it to you though. I know, but
yeah, it's interesting. Very, very esoteric, very unintuitive. Because on the one hand, you have two different things. You have different things losing their identity, right? Inner's becoming outer, outer, inner, upper, lower. And the male and female become a single so that there won't be a male or a female. And then in the other place, you have eyes. There is distinction, but everything just has to stay in its appropriate place. Eyes in the place of eye, hand in the place of hand, foot in the place of foot. So how do you know how do you apply this principle more broadly? How do you know what needs to be taken away, like gender, for example, or I guess sex? This is physical. I don't know if they would necessarily separate those two, but sex or gender and, body parts, eye, foot, and I don't know. Interesting. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting sayings here where it's like, it's esoteric. So I don't know. I can't, there's not a whole, it's up to debate, I think. So, okay. Saying number 28. Jesus said, "I stood in the middle of the world and appeared to them in the flesh. I found them all drunk. I didn't find any of them thirsty. My soul ached for the children of humanity because they were blind in their hearts and couldn't see. They came into the world empty and plan on leaving the world empty. Meanwhile, they're drunk. When they shake off their wine, then they'll change." So there's at least two occurrences of Jesus referring to people as being drunk. So I guess that's how they refer to the people who don't have knowledge, which makes sense. They're kind of like drunk. Their senses are distorted. They don't have the right understanding like us. We're the sober people.
Yeah.
So
yeah. This is a little bit the opposite of, there are certain people who believe if you consume certain chemicals, then you're going to gain some kind of knowledge. I think the author of the Gospel of Thomas probably would see it maybe the opposite, that if you consume certain chemicals, you're not going to gain knowledge. In fact, you're going to have less. And so you need to lose your drunkenness in order to get it. Interesting.
Yeah, I've thought of it as like a spiritual, like he's talking about it like metaphorically, but I guess there could be I guess there is also a physical or like a real part of it. Especially because of his conversation with the disciples where he says, "Oh yeah, y'all are drunk. You don't understand," which I would assume that they're not drunk. They're just saying, so we can't know. But it is interesting. That would definitely align with, I guess Gnostics would tend to be more ascetic. So 28, verse 29, Jesus said, "If the flesh came into existence because of spirit, that's amazing. If spirit came into existence because of the body, that's really amazing. But I'm amazed at how such great wealth has been placed in this poverty."
Do you think when he's talking about such great wealth being placed in poverty. He's talking about spirits being placed in bodies or in flesh. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, we can't say definitively. We don't have the oral tradition of St. Thomas the Apostle, but that would make a lot of sense because he just switches so quickly from talking about the body and spirit to talking about wealth and poverty.
Or it could actually not be that at all. It could just be that he's taking like an assumed thing of like two things that are opposite. And then he's saying, what's even more profound is this, trying to show how much more profound is, not more profound, but, show to what degree of surprise he finds in so much wealth and so much poverty, which in this case, context would probably be pretty important. Like what might he be looking at that's so much wealth amongst so much poverty?
Yeah. Yeah. That is definitely one of the weak parts of the Gospel of Thomas just being isolated sayings. Like when it comes to, I guess if you're like a Gnostic trying to defend this as an early Gnostic apologist, you can't really say, oh, context is key. The only context you have is that this is all on one scroll together. So I guess you can just appeal to whatever you heard in the secret room when St. Thomas the Apostle was passing everything down to you. So yeah, I guess that's why this probably wasn't as popular of a subgenre or way to write an apocryphal gospel. So saying 31, Jesus said, no prophet is welcome in their own village, which Jesus says, no doctor heals those who know them.
Okay. So hear me out. Maybe he's saying, I'm taking a guess here. Perhaps he's saying that there has to be a hierarchical, the doctor heals those who do not know, those who know less, and so that's kind of what he's getting at there.
But they don't know them. It's like a personal knowledge.
Oh, you think it's personal knowledge? Yeah.
It says the doctor doesn't heal those who don't know them.
Yeah. What do you think about that one?
It's a little too esoteric. It's a little too esoteric for me. I didn't get a class on esoteric knowledge in my biblical studies degree, unfortunately. So I'm lost. They did a good job covering it up. So yeah.
Sweet.
Anyways, that's a saying. Saying 32, the parable of the fortified city. Jesus said, a city built and fortified on a high mountain can't fall, nor can it be hidden.
That sounds like
similar to the Sermon on the Mount, or the city built on a hill. Yeah, but here it's talking about the aspect of being built and fortified. So I guess maybe you could connect that to like the foundation and the talk about Jesus being the cornerstone and the rock on which things are built. No qualms with that. Saying 37, his disciples said, when will you appear to us? When will we see you? Interesting. Jesus said, when you strip naked without being ashamed and throw your clothes on the ground and stomp on them as little children would, then you'll see the Son of the Living One and won't be afraid.
Okay. So two thoughts.
I'm guessing.
Oh, yes. Go for it. You first.
So I was going to say, I'm guessing this is really promoting this whole idea that we on the inside have these, like our conscience, or maybe they probably wouldn't use conscience. There are certain things that everything in our body is screaming at us not to do because it's stupid and it's foolish and it's shameful. And I guess they're just trying to really push against that. Like you have to free yourself from this honor shame society and this idea that you have to have honor to I guess maybe even to be prepared to receive this esoteric knowledge in the first place. You have to be willing to look stupid and be totally different. That's what I can get from this. I don't know what you said. You had two different things for this one.
I had two different thoughts, but I thought that was incredibly different than I was thinking, and that might actually make sense. I know that's not the only time in history that people have thought that the systems in place were bad and being different for the sake of being different was good. So, so at first, losing clothes actually makes you seem like you're kind of going back to Adam and Eve in some sense, right? Because they didn't have clothes. And then the other thing that I thought of is, clothes cover up the physical, right? But also to wear clothes means you're putting value on the physical world to some degree or another, right? And when you stop caring about that, like I stopped caring what I look like, then I put more emphasis on the non-physical, right? And so if these Gnostics are dualistic, they believe the spiritual world is more important than the physical world, then it would actually make sense. That's where my mind goes when I think about that.
Yeah, that tracks. That makes sense. Damn. Yeah. That's good. Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's good. Saying 43. His disciples said to him, "Who are you to say these things to us?" And again, there's no I'm not cutting any part out of this. This is just how it comes. His disciples said to him, "Who are you to say these things to us? You don't realize," and then this is the response, "You don't realize who I am from what I say to you, but you become like those Judeans who either love the tree but hate its fruit, or love the fruit but hate the tree." Dang, that's...
So it's like what Jesus says and who he is, those two go together.
Yeah, he says, "You don't realize who I am from what I say to you."
Yeah.
So I guess it's like you come to an understanding of him through something else. I don't know.
I think it's
Because
trying to
in the
connect.
next
Go for it.
Because in the next part, the last part of it, it talks about loving the tree and hating its fruit, or loving the fruit and hating the tree. Kind of this disconnect of loving a person, but not their connecting fruit to works or what they're doing.
So you think he's...
So I guess he's saying you...
My assumption is he was condemning the idea of loving the fruit and hating the tree, or loving the tree and hating the fruit.
Yeah, I think he is. So I think he's saying, in the same way that these Judeans or Jews love the fruit and hate the tree, or love the tree and hate the fruit, in the same way, you don't realize who I am by what I say to you. But my fruit and my tree, like as a tree, my fruit is consistent with me. And you need to, like, I guess, take my sayings with like what I'm doing.
Yeah. So you can't say you love me while you don't like what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. Or vice versa. Either way, yeah. Which is interesting that this quote is in a gospel that's unique in its genre as being just a bunch of sayings of Jesus without any stories. Anyways, yeah, that's interesting. Saying 47. Jesus said, "It's not possible for anyone to mount 2 horses or stretch 2 bows. And it's not possible for a servant to follow 2 leaders, because they'll respect one and despise the other." That's from the scriptures. And those are actually good analogies to go beside that. "No one drinks old wine and immediately wants to drink new wine. And new wine isn't put into old wineskins, because they'd burst. Nor is old wine put in new wineskins, because it'd spoil. A new patch of cloth isn't sewn into an old coat, because it'd tear apart." I could see that being an actual saying from the gospel. Like those being things that Jesus actually... I mean, part of them are from the canonical gospels, but I could see Jesus also saying that. Saying what what recorded in the canonical gospels being sections from him saying that. Because tracks with me.
Yeah. I think that might be... I was going to take a guess at what chapter that was in, when Jesus talks about new wineskins and old wineskins. But the other part, 2 different sections. I'm trying to remember, but there was a part that was quoting Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount. I think it was, the 2 masters, right? That's Matthew 6.
Yes. No one can serve 2 masters. Yes.
And the other one, yeah.
I know that that's at least in Mark, which means it's probably in the other synoptics, or could be at least. The
wineskin?
Yeah, the wineskin part. I'm pretty sure that's in Mark.
Yeah.
But, okay. Saying 53. His disciples said to him, "Is circumcision useful or not? Is circumcision useful or not?" He said to them, "If it were useful, parents would have children who are born circumcised. But the true circumcision in spirit has become profitable in every way." That's interesting.
Imagine if, like, God had kind of talked about circumcising people's hearts, meaning there was some kind of meaningful way that someone could be, like, circumcised that wasn't physical. It'd be wild if that was in the Bible.
Yeah, in the canonical Bible. Especially if it was like in the Old Testament too.
Yeah, if it was in the Old Testament, what would we even do?
That'd be crazy.
That'd be wild.
Yeah. If you're not tracking, by the way, that is even in Deuteronomy. That's a big thing throughout Deuteronomy. But Jesus would not downplay. I don't think he would say, like, he definitely wouldn't say it's not useful because you should be born that way. Because part of the circumcision, the explanation I've heard for circumcision is Abraham is commanded to circumcise himself right after sleeping with Hagar, her having a child, and then sending her off. And so it's almost as a, like, the covenant, it is a covenant, but at the same time, the covenant is attached to his sexual sin in trying to gain a child that God promised him on his own terms and not dealing justly with his slave. It's cutting off the part of him that he just used to sin to try and bring about God's promises. And circumcision of the heart is about cutting off the part of the heart, the sinful part, the hard part of the heart that resists God. So, and Jesus was circumcised himself, as we talked about 2 episodes ago, actually, in the Arabic infancy gospel. So, I mean, he's obviously circumcised in the canonical gospels in Luke chapter 2, but we had a special part talking about that then. So he definitely wouldn't have said it's not useful. But yeah, the part of the true circumcision in the spirit has become profitable in every way. It's definitely thoroughly biblical. Saying, Jesus said, 2 will rest on a couch. One will die, the other will live. Salome said, who are you, sir, to climb onto my couch and eat off my table as if you're from someone? Jesus said to her, I'm the one who exists in equality. Some of what belongs to my Father was given to me. She responds, I'm your disciple. Jesus responds, so I'm telling you, if someone is equal, they'd be full of light. But if they're divided, they'll be full of darkness. So we do see the theme of personal unity here. For
like one person being unified to themselves.
whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, being whole. Like if you're divided, you're full of darkness. But
they have a term in, sorry, this makes me think there's a term, I think it's in like psychology, I could be wrong, that I think like there's like integration, like that you like kind of put yourself together. Anyway, yeah.
Like you're subconscious and conscious, like you're fully conscious of yourself and like consistent and know yourself.
Don't ask me what that means. I don't know.
Okay, but it's there and it exists.
Yeah, there's a sense like it's better to be integrated than not be integrated. I think I heard of it in terms of like attachment filters and things like that, but that's all way over my head right now.
Okay, dang. Yeah. Okay. Saying 67. Jesus said, whoever knows everything but is personally lacking lacks everything. This is interesting to be Gnostic.
Yeah.
Whoever knows everything but is personally lacking lacks everything. So, not sure what personally lacking means, but saying 82. Jesus said, whoever is near me is near the fire, and whoever is far from me is far from the kingdom. And we already talked about this one, if you remember, it was the Agrapha, correct? Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
If you don't, it's okay. Well, if you're listening, you can go and listen to our Agrapha episode because we do talk about this one. But yeah, I think the idea is Jesus is great and holy, but that's also dangerous, like Isaiah being in the presence of God. Being like, woe is me, I'm a sinner. I could burn up and disintegrate. So, saying 91, they said to him, tell us who you are so that we may trust you. He said to them, you read the face of the sky and the earth, but you don't know the one right in front of you, and you don't know how to read the present moment.
That sounds like you search the skies and know when it's going to rain, but you don't know how to test the times or check the times or look at the times. Discern the times. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, this does kind of sound like something Jesus might say. Yeah.
Same pattern.
Yeah, very, very similar. Then there's this parable of the yeast, saying 96. Jesus said, the Father's kingdom can be compared to a woman who took a little yeast and hid it in flour. She made it into large loaves of bread. Anyone who has ears to hear should hear.
Well, I do remember Jesus actually had one time when he talked about there being like yeast, and he's like, a little yeast goes everywhere, right? But I think there might be another one.
Or there's like hidden yeast, and then eventually like the kingdom of heaven is like yeast, and then the dough leavens or something like that.
Let me see if I can find it. Sorry.
All good.
Okay, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and mixed into 50 pounds of flour until all of it was leavened. That's Matthew 13:33. You know, it's very similar.
Yeah. I wonder if this is putting a little bit of a Gnostic twist on it, though, because it says the woman took a little yeast and hid it in flour. So you have the hiding. That might be a little more esoteric. And she made it into large loaves of bread. So maybe not. I don't know. Perhaps. It's up in the air. So
it could be hard to know like what you're supposed to read into and what you're not supposed to read into.
Yeah, really. Yeah. It's trippy. Yeah. Here's a good one. I think that this one sounds like it could be a possible like canonical or like not canonical because it's not in the canon. It's similar to what's said in the canon, but okay. Saying 101, classy number. Whoever doesn't hate their father and mother as I do can't become my disciple. And whoever doesn't love their father and mother as I do can't become my disciple. For my mother, ellipses, because we don't know that part is the fragment is gone. But my true mother gave me life. So I'm just gonna ignore the last part because I don't know what he says about my mother before saying my true mother. But the like whoever doesn't hate their father and mother as I do can't become my disciple, and whoever doesn't love their father and mother as I do can't become my disciple. That makes sense to me. I mean, the only thing is that Jesus is, I guess his relationship to his parents would be different in that. Well, I don't know.
Well, is it saying it as
I was thinking it's different in that.
sorry, is it saying that he, like, as much as he loves Jesus's father and mother, or as much as Jesus loves the person's father and mother?
Huh. It doesn't say.
Because maybe he's saying that his expectation is that you love your father and mother as much as I love your father and mother. So his expectation is that they're supposed to have like a lot of love for their father and mother. I don't know. Maybe reading in another way of that's not helpful.
Yeah, I would think the latter. I would think that it's about loving their father and mother as he loves his father and mother.
Okay.
That's what I would assume.
Oh,
That
yeah,
was my first assumption.
Because he says it's his true mother, right? So then if he's talking about that, that means
Yeah.
Jesus has his own parents in mind. That makes sense.
I could see this being canonical. I mean, there is the verse that says, whoever doesn't hate their father and mother for my sake isn't worthy of the gospel, right?
Yeah. I want to say Luke 6, but I could be wrong. Well, I can always be wrong. I want to say Luke 6.
Yeah. But I could see this like him also adding on him saying, as I love mine or as I hate mine. I could see that. I don't know. So, yeah. Okay. The last saying that we're going to be looking at, saying 114. Simon Peter said to him, Mary should leave us because women aren't worthy of life. Wow. Okay. Jesus said, look, am I to make her a man so that she may become a living spirit too? She's equal to you men, because every woman who makes herself manly will enter the kingdom of heaven.
Whoa. Okay. So one thing to point out that was totally missing from my understanding right at the beginning when I thought about this story is I didn't get the spiritual aspect of it, right? Jesus says, we're meant to make her a man so that she will become a living spirit too. I don't know.
No. Sorry. It's who am I to make her a man? ? So that she may become a living spirit too, comma, she's equal to you men, comma, because every woman who makes herself manly will enter the kingdom of
heaven. Okay.
Does that make sense?
So it sounds like she's already a living spirit?
She is equal to the men because every woman who makes herself manly will enter the kingdom of heaven so that she may become a living spirit.
Oh, okay.
So by her becoming manly, she's becoming a living spirit.
Okay. Wow. Also, I guess it isn't saying that she becomes a man per se. She just becomes more manly. So like loses some of the aspects that make her like a woman. Yeah. Or, she actually does become a man.
Well, I would think it is making her a man. I mean, becoming a man does mean to become more manly. And Jesus says, look, am I to make her a man? And then at the end, she says, every woman who makes herself manly will enter the kingdom of heaven. So based on Jesus saying, am I to make her a man? Jesus is saying in this, I would think he's saying she's going to have to make herself a man to enter in the kingdom of heaven and become a living spirit too.
Okay. Can I just point something out here? I'm thinking through this and I've already found like a little bit of a problem with my thought here, but here's what this thought was. The thought was, if you believe that women who make themselves more manly, and we say all women who make themselves more manly are going to enter the kingdom of heaven, it presents a problem if you think that there are men who are not going to enter the kingdom of heaven. But then I guess perhaps, maybe you're saying that the justification is not based on like the result, like do you end up becoming like a man, but instead what trajectory are you going on? I think that's probably the best solution, right? So women are on the trajectory of becoming more manly. And however, there's some men who are, maybe they're more manly than the woman, but they're not on a trajectory to becoming more manly or good or anything. Yeah. So anyway,
they're on a trajectory to becoming more feminine.
Yeah. So,
well, maybe it's more on par with the idea of like sin. sinfulness and how I guess like the Protestant understanding is of like if you die and you're not like fully perfected, for those who might believe in some form of Christian perfectionism, then when you're resurrected or judged or in the afterlife, you are made perfect
Mm.
because you were on that trajectory already. So maybe it's like you have to be on a trajectory on this life, but then in the next life you will be like a full man. Which I guess doesn't really undo what you were saying because you're talking about being on a trajectory in this life. What trajectory? How manly are you? Yeah, yeah. So
Well, that last one certainly
yeah,
does not
it's
help.
interesting.
That last one certainly does not help with the orthodoxy index.
Yeah, I was right about to say this is like the bitter aftertaste in the mouth of a food critic. And for me, I'm gonna have to give this like a 2 out of 10. I guess it has some stuff from the canonical gospels, but anybody can copy other stuff. I don't know, maybe I'll give it a 1. I guess Jesus is divine. I don't
Mm.
know. Yeah, I'll give it a 2. 2 out of 10. Yeah, there's not a lot orthodox here.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know where I'd put it. I'll say a 3, just because I want to be more charitable than
3?
you. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I could put a 3. That last part is really problematic, because women
Yeah.
are made in the image of God, and God was delighted in Eve being a woman. He was delighted in her being a
Yeah.
woman, even when she was not a man. Like, he was happy about that. He did not want her to be a man. And so,
Yeah, like
it's really problematic when you start saying, oh, she should become more manly. What were you going to say?
yeah, sorry. No. Yeah. In Genesis 2, God says it's not good for man to be alone. And instead of making him another man, he makes him a woman. And the woman and man together are the image of God. Like I talked about, like the unity and diversity, the unity in diversity,
Mm.
Um, yeah, there's something about there is no male nor female, nor Greek nor Jew, nor slave, nor free in Christ. But that's not an erasing of your identity. That's not like an imposition of a culture upon yourself. Like I think just about every religion I can think of is inherently tied to culture versus Christianity, where Christianity has all different types of cultural expressions. So, and I'm just really heavily pointing to another better podcast, but the Bible Project podcast, in that Family of God podcast series, they talk about how in the church, I think it's at the Holy Sepulchre, but one of the churches in Jerusalem, they have a church with like the Lord's Prayer written in all the different like hundreds of languages. And then they have like icons of Jesus from like all these different like countries and cultures and stuff. Like there really is there's something about unity and diversity, culturally, gender wise, class wise. So yeah. So yeah, that's the Gospel of Thomas, the most famous New Testament apocrypha, right? Would you say so?
I would say that most people know what the Gospel of Thomas is. Whether they know like what the contents is, they've heard the name, me included, right? But it's interesting that that's the one that people know and hear about, because it's way cooler, like Mary holding up baby Jesus and doing miracles, than hearing some praise. Like that's way more entertaining.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think this one had a lot more copies. I think it's been more popular throughout the time. Although now that I think of it, yeah, even throughout time, these stories should have stuck on more. I guess they did, just outside of the Apocrypha, just in other tradition. They were passed down in other traditions. And then I guess they were already familiar with at least some of the traditions. And so the Apocryphal Gospels didn't stick as much. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is the Apocryphal Gospel of Thomas in all of its Gnostic lack of glory. So, hope you enjoyed this episode of the Babylonian. Make sure to share it, comment any thoughts that you have, or any extra interpretations that we missed on these sayings. And we'll see you next time in Babylonia.
Bye.